Hi, everyone. I'm really sorry I couldn't have a live class today. I mentioned in my announcement that I'm having a big issue with my sciatic nerve. So today at 1:45, I'm going to go to my doctor and he's going to give me a nice big injection, but it's going to make me feel a whole lot better. So thank God for that. So at any rate, I'm going to show you the presentation as planned to show in class today. And please do not hesitate to reach out to me via text if you have any questions about any of the material or the assignments. The module will go live after I finish recording this presentation for you. So give me a moment and I will share my screen. Okay, so I'm also going to be putting up the PowerPoint itself so you can go back and review that, but I want to be able to give my comments and viewpoints about the material as well, in case there's anything that when you look at the PowerPoint itself, you're not sure about what I'm talking about. So here we go. So let's look at first the types of culture in terms of high culture and low culture. So when we're talking about high culture, it's the type of activities that people who are in a higher social status, they tend to like to do. People have more money, whereas low culture, or it's also known as popular culture, it's talking about activities that people who maybe more middle class or low class in terms of financial means they prefer to do. Now, the definition that's given from the book refers to cultural activities of the non-elite. I hate that definition. I think it's very polarizing when you're talking about elite versus non-elite. I don't really like that. But if you can think about in terms of people who have more or less money, I think that's a little less polarizing. So if you think about activities such as skiing or maybe boating, yachting, tennis, golf, they typically are associated with people with higher financial status, okay? And whereas maybe activities such as monster truck rallies, professional wrestling, race car driving, those are typically seen as more popular cultural activities of people who don't have as much money. Now, again, I'm talking in general terms. It doesn't mean like if you have a lot of money, you don't enjoy the activities of what's considered to be low culture and vice versa. It's just what's seen as typical. Now, we need to talk about what your personal lens is. So we're talking about your own perspective, and it's created by your experiences as a person, how you value other types of cultures. So think about things that are important to you. Do you aspire to try and do more high cultural type of activities or not? Like, is it a goal for you to be able to play golf every weekend or to own a boat someday or any of those high social status type of activities? Or maybe you don't really value material things as much. It's more about experience versus things. The book talks about what's called the activity value, and it's the social status we give to people who are in like high value professions, people who are seen as the doers in Western civilization or Western cultures, I should say. So if you think about your doctors, your lawyers, uh, CEOs of companies, moguls, we tend to put a lot of high social status on those doers, professors, for example. Whereas Eastern cultures, they tend to value a person's growth. So it's more about their spiritual growth, about what they give to the community, how they are becoming more evolved as a person. Not to say that Eastern cultures don't value, what you do for a living, or Western cultures don't value growing as a person. It's just it's generally is seen as what they value more of. Okay. Now, we need to really dig into these value orientations, and I'm going to put up a study alert here. So really pay close attention to these. what the Hofstede value orientations are, it's a chart of cultural values, and they were developed by this social psychologist, Geert Hofstede. It's either Hofstede or Hofstede. I'm not entirely sure how you pronounce his last name, but there are 6 categories of cultural differences in respect to how values are seen. Now, something I want to point out, when you look at the chart on page 103 in your book, for some reason, they list 5 categories. I don't know why. It's always seen as 6 when you Google these value orientations. So the one that is not listed on the chart is individual versus collectivism, but we are going to include that within our own study. So I just want to make sure I make that very, very clear. So make sure you take notes about individual versus collectivism, okay? So let's take a look at these different value orientations. And I'm going to try and pause when it talks about individual versus collectivism. I hope I can pause it. If I don't, if I'm not able to, then I will discuss it more after the video is done. You'll see this in your book too, except for individualism versus collectivism. So I'm going to just quickly talk about each one so it makes a little more sense to you. So the power distance one, it's who has more power and how they use that power versus ones who don't have as much power. So we're talking about business organizations, families, community, the power distance between those who have it and those who do not. So if you notice, they will give examples of the different countries that either greatly value one of these categories or does not. So the power distance, so if you think about countries, you know, they show here the Scandinavian countries, they really want everyone to have equal types of power versus the Middle Eastern countries or Malaysia, Myanmar, they really have a big gap between those who have power and those who do not. Okay, so here's what I was talking about, the value orientation of individualism versus collectivism. So individualism, when you think about the US culture, I'm talking generally, right? We're talking about in general terms here. It's really more about the individual, what he or she achieves, doesn't achieve, the social status, how much power they have, their own values. It's the person that is more important versus the group. So versus such as it's typically more Latin America countries, they really emphasize family. They emphasize what's doing its best for the group. Some Eastern countries such as Asia, Eastern Asian countries, they are a little more about the family, the group, the society that they belong to. And that's also true of some religions. So I know in the Orthodox Jewish faith, that the individual's needs are not greatly valued as much as the family's needs. So that's the difference between individualism versus collectivism in that value orientation. Okay, so let's talk about low context versus high context communication. I think the video may skipped a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and link the video itself separately because it missed something. Not sure why it cut out when it did. The fun of technology. So let's go ahead and talk about low context versus high context communication. So when we're talking about low context communication, let's think about Western culture. Okay, let's take the US, for example. We are a lot more literal in what we say and what we mean. We really value time. Time is money, right? Now, I'm talking again generally. There are certain parts of our country that really value time a lot more than others. So I can tell you when I lived in New York, time is money. Like you show up on time, you do things on time. People don't have time to mess around. Versus when I lived in Alabama for a little while, and things are a little more loosey goosey there. Not that time isn't valued, but it's not as important. Okay. So, but overall, we really value time in our country, and we're very precise in what we mean. Versus in a high context communication type of culture, it's more about what's said. I mean, what is implied behind what is said, or the gesture behind what is said. Uh, the tone of the voice is emphasized more in this type of communication. So it gives an example here of Japanese, African American, Mexican, Latino type of cultures. It's more about the doing versus what is said that is emphasized more. So you can see there's a lot more implied messages that are valued more. And they really like to spend more time in groups. And yes, their emphasis of time is a lot less structured. And I can tell you from my own experience that I've experienced both sides of this type of communication as a military spouse. So when we lived in Germany, that is a very low context type of communication country. They are very literal in what they say and what they mean. There is very little gray area and what they talk about, and they definitely value time. So if a German says dinner is going to be at 6 o'clock, you're there at 6 o'clock. It is very rude to show up late when you go to a German's house. Versus when I lived in Guam, very much a high context type of communication type of society. If there's going to be a barbecue at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you can expect people rolling in at 5, 6 o'clock, any time of the day. It just basically means we're going to start at this time, but you're welcome to show up anytime afterwards. And having those two sides of experience was very, very interesting, especially since I went directly from Germany to Guam, two very different types of cultural communities. So that can give you some examples of the differences between low context and high context communication. Let's talk about communication reinforcing culture. So there's something that's mentioned in the book about communication rules, and it's that behavior that's expected within a cultural community. So we have expectations of how we behave in terms of our workplace community, our ethnic community. If we belong to a religious organization, there's behaviors within that type of community. Our own uh, area that we live in, maybe even the neighborhood has types of behavior that's expected. And with that, there's something called performative action. So we tend to emphasize or de-emphasize parts of ourselves in order to achieve a goal or to belong. So here's an example. When I am among my colleagues, my other educator colleagues, typically, especially ones I'm not familiar with, I'm going to be much more precise and professional than I might with colleagues who I've established really good ties with. So the communication department, we are a pretty tight bunch. We laugh, we joke, we We let our hair down a little bit more. Whereas when I'm working with maybe people who are administrators, I'm going to be much more professional, use much more literal language. And I'm going hopefully be seen as someone who is very professional and on top of my game. So I'm going to emphasize my professionalism more. Now we're talking about in terms of our cultural selves. So, and this is something we will touch on more later in the semester. I know in the African American community, there is some tension about African Americans who may be being accused of trying to pass for being more white, or they're not being Black enough within their community. So, and that's something that there's a tension within there. And then there's also tensions within religious communities. I'm sorry, when I'm in having some pain, my brain kind of goes, a little haywire. So I apologize. In some religious communities, it's celebrated if you seem to be much more Christian or you seem to be much more devout to your faith. So people may emphasize those parts of themselves in order to achieve more of a higher status or to achieve a goal. So here are the discussion questions that I'm asking for you guys to talk about in an assignment for next week. So please write this down. What are some communication rules expected within your cultural community? So that can be any type of cultural community that you belong to. It can be maybe you are a member of the LGBTQ community. What's some communication rules expected within that, or within a religious community, or even a neighborhood, or even your ethnic heritage. Think about the different types of cultural groups that you belong to. Second question, what kind of performative actions do you take to achieve a goal? What are some things about yourself that you emphasize or de-emphasize in order to belong or to get a goal? So I'm going to leave these questions up here for a moment here so you can write those down. So that'll be a discussion assignment that's due next Tuesday night, 11:59 p.m. As well as there is another assignment that I'm asking you to do, which is going to be fun and is based on Hofstede value orientations. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this share for a moment. Okay, now I'm going to share what's in our module. All right, so in the module that I'm going to be making live shortly, here's the exercise 2 Hofstede video. So I'm asking you to do is to create a scenario, and you're going to demonstrate 2 of these types of value orientations. So create a short story in your video, create a scenario where there are struggles between 2 people in at least 2 of the orientations. Possibilities could include a work meeting, having dinner at someone's house for the first time, work interview, a first date, the first day of a class. So look over the chart of those, and I'm actually going to I'll add in the individual versus collectivism too. I'm going to put that in there as well. But, have fun with this, guys. Use family, your friends, your pets. A lot of you have pets, toys. You can also use Powtoon to create an animated video if you feel so inclined. And I put a link there if you want to play around with that. And this is how I'm grading this. Do I know what type of scenario is going on? The orientations that you are demonstrating are identifiable. So you can create, a sign with a piece of paper, or a video caption is fine. And the examples of that value orientation are correctly demonstrated. So if you plan to do showing femininity versus masculinity, make sure you are showing it correctly in your scenario. Okay, no time limit is required for this. Again, when you're uploading it, if you're using an MP4 file, make sure you allow time for that to upload because they take a little bit longer. If you want to use TikTok, Go for it. Media recording or YouTube link, of course, and the YouTube can be unlisted, just like with your social mixer before. Okay, so that is one of your assignments for this next week. And then the discussion. So there's 2 questions up at the end of the lecture. I'm going to ask for you to write your responses in this discussion, and then go back and respond to another student's post. What is something he or she said that resounded with you and why? So that is your participation for this week. Okay. So that is that. I'm going to put those live shortly, and I also included in the module the participation for week 4. Now, this is not something you have to do, for this module, but I want to put it up as a preview because this will be done during class next week. I'm going to put you all into teams and breakout rooms, and you're going to come up with 2 possible questions for the quiz over chapter 3, which will be in week 4's module. So the questions should come from the pages assigned in your book or from this lecture or videos. And the questions should be multiple choice with 4 possible choices. And then I may use these questions for your quiz or the final exam. And after the class is done, someone within your team is going to upload and submit your team's questions. You just have to make sure everyone's names are on the document, okay? So that's going to be taking place during next week's class. So maybe you want to start, brainstorming some possible questions. So when you all get together, you can vote on which ones you want to use. Okay, so that will go live shortly. And again, everyone, please do not hesitate to reach out to me if any questions about the material. Text me. It's the quickest way to get a hold of me. And if you need office hour, let me know too. I'll try to work that with you. But again, sorry I couldn't meet with you live today. But I hope you have a wonderful 4th of July weekend. Stay safe. Don't set off any fireworks. Let's not start any fires. But please go and enjoy some if the town is having a celebration. I will be in a parade. I am Mrs. Vacaville 2021. And so I will be on a float in Fairfield. So if you're at the 4th of July parade, you'll see me there. Otherwise, have a great weekend, everyone. And I will see you next week. Bye now.